I think I should be good. I think I'm live. Hi, if you can hear me and I sound all right, throw some thumbs up in the chat. Um, it's a bit weird. I'm normally the one streaming the talks, not actually giving the talks, so hopefully everything is working all good. Let's wait for some responses, maybe. Yeah, thank you, Lyndon. All right, I've got chat up, so if you got any questions throughout there, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Pure Geo. If you got I've got chat up, so if you got any questions throughout the talk, let me know. But hey, I'm James. Tonight I'm gonna be talking about Firebase and building some apps with Firebase. An hour is not a long time to talk about this, so I'm gonna try and build an app sort of live, and we'll see what happens, and hopefully everything works out well. Um, all right. I want to start off with this. Leo, shout out to Leo who sent me this yesterday. He threw my talk's bio into an AI, and it sort of got a general idea. I'm not a musician, that's for sure, and I don't work for the Internet Archive, but I do really think Firebase is really great, and it does do push notifications, and security is really cool, but it's kind of funny. But for those who haven't met me already, hey, I'm James, James Dearlove. Also go by Jimmy D or Tree, apparently, at this point. My pronouns are he and him, hit and his. You can find me on as Jimmy D on Discord and Slack. If you're still using the Slack, you should get over to Discord, discord.uqcf.org. I'm in my final semester of computer science, and I am a software developer at the Department of Environment Science in Queensland. So if you've got any random questions about science stuff, then hit me up. And you're probably going to pick up really quickly tonight that I really, really like cartoons. So feel free to ask questions about that later. But in the next hour, I want to try and cover three main topics of Firebase, and of course, actually creating the Firebase app. So we're going to be talking about Firebase authentication, so that's your login system. We're going to talk about Firebase Firestore, which is a database-like system. And finally, we're going to talk about hosting that application. So pretty much go from start to end of building an app, and it's perfect for hackathon. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to be running pretty quickly, and I'll be uploading the final code after the talk as well. But you can jump onto github.com/jamestealer/Firebase demo. I will put a link in the comments if you're watching after this stream. You can install dependencies. We're running a React app, so you're going to have to install dependencies with npm install, run the local dev server with npm start, and if you happen to be wanting to host this at the end as well, you're also going to need the Firebase CLI, but it's not required. You also can just hang out and watch and ask any questions along the way. So I'm going to quickly demonstrate the actual application. It's called PyChirp. It is a very, very simple Twitter clone. So this is just a starting template we've got. I've put some sample data in here. The idea is we're going to create an application that you can post stuff up, and then everyone can see those posts, essentially. That's a general idea. So cool. So what on earth actually is Firebase? Well, in short, it's a platform that provides the tools and services to help you build apps quickly and easily. Very emphasis on the quickly and easily part. You're going to see how quickly it is, even just to get started with Firebase. It's just a couple of clicks and you've got a Firebase project set up. Authentication also is really easy, and it's pretty much a running theme with Firebase. And it's also really, really powerful because, well, it's backed by Google. So it runs on the Google Cloud platform, which means it scales super, super well. So if your hackathon project blows up and you get a ton of traffic, you don't need to you don't need to worry. So if your application isn't going to casually crash unless you've done something horribly wrong. It's also free, and free with generous limits. So obviously you're not going to be running a Facebook on Firebase for free, but you can get started pretty quickly, and you can make as many Firebase projects as you want for free. And it does a lot, and I mean a lot. So this is just a general summary of a lot of the tools and services that Firebase provides, notably authentication, database storage, object storage, so like files, cloud functions, so serverless like backend, hosting, machine learning, A/B testing, push notifications. It has extensions to help you build your application really quickly, and so much more. Again, I'm really going to be talking about the first five-ish, mostly focusing on authentication, the NoSQL databases, Firestore, and hosting. But But object storage and cloud functions are also pretty simple, and I'll quickly touch on them at the end. Um, quickly in the comments, thanks, Sunny. Yeah, of course, if you want to log into Moss on your phone, I guess that can work. And yeah, I got some cool lights, I guess. So we're going to get straight into it. I'm actually going to create a Firebase app live now, and then we're going to actually add that to this application I've got here. So this is the Firebase website. You can jump onto it at firebase.com or firebase.google.com, and we're quite literally just going to go hit get started, and I get thrown into the Firebase console. You can see I've already got a couple of projects in here, so obviously demoing and making sure this worked. Comet is a project that I've gotten stuck on and it's got lazy. And on board was a Deco 3801 project we did last year with the group, which we used Firebase Auth for, which made things super, super easy. But quite literally, what we're going to do, we're going to create a project, we're going to call it Firestore. You don't have to worry too much about this unique identifier. Users aren't going to see this. It's mostly just a thing to make it unique, so you don't have to worry about your name being taken or whatever. It's mostly just an identifier for Google. You also can enable Google Analytics. I'm going to disable this because we're not worried about Google Analytics, and you can add this after, but it adds a ton more features, so you can, once your application is, say, in production, you can very quickly be able to see what's going on. If you've pushed a bad change, you can see why it's causing errors. And, Google Analytics being Google Analytics, it knows so much more than you probably realize. So I'm not going to use it tonight. So that's it. We're already creating the project. We'll give this a quick minute. Shouldn't take too long. Still waiting. Almost there. All right, cool. So once you've created your application, you get this cool Firebase console. So you can see down the side, we've got all the tons of different Firebase services and tools. So you can see the top 5 here. But we're going to get started by just creating an app at the front. So, whoops. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually, Firebase works across multiple platforms. So here we can see we can add it to an iOS app, an Android app, web, Unity. It works across both native, so native Swift and native Kotlin and Java development for Android, or you can use Flutter, or you can use React Native. Firebase pretty much has libraries for everything, so you don't have to worry about what you're actually building on. It works really well. So we're going to start by just creating a web app here. It's going to ask us what we want to nickname it. We're just going to call it Firechirp Web. And we're going to register it. And that's it. That's going to create some tokens for us. And then we can use these. Now, the good thing about these tokens is I can show these on stream and not have to worry. The thing about these tokens is they're not necessarily a private identifier. They're actually more of an identifier to ensure that Google actually knows what application you're representing as Firebase. And that's because of a number of things that Firebase is a bit architecturally different to how you typically generate, say, like a typical server and client application. But we'll get into that more in the Firestore. So we've got this. Now, this is the application I've got here. It is a React app. Don't worry too much about the React part. We're not focusing too much on that. But we can see here's our app. It's pretty straightforward. Just build up with a bunch of components. Those components are listed here. So create post, timeline posts, just so we can display it all. But what we're going to do simply to start off with is we're going to create a new file. I'm going to call it firebase.ts. I'm using TypeScript for this project. And then we can get started by putting this in. So I have already installed in this project the Firebase npm package and also the React Firebase UI, and that's just to help make sure we get through those quickly, and I don't have to wait for npm to install that because we all know how bad npm can be. But I'm going to start with importing Firebase from Firebase. All right, and while we're here, we're also going to import Firebase Auth, and also import Firebase Firestore. And that's just so I don't have to come back and do those later. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take the Firebase config, throw that into here, pretty easy. And we are going to finally initialize Firebase. And just because I feel like doing this, I'm going to export this instance of Firebase, and that will allow me to grab this instance of Firebase anywhere in the application that I import this file. So that's it. Firebase is now officially running in this application. Now, if I go back to this, this is a live demo. This is the local server on my machine. It's not doing anything. The login system doesn't work. Jimmy is just a static thing I threw in there. There's nothing really different about that. So we're going to talk about Firebase Auth now, so we can actually get a login system going. Firebase Auth is an identity service, and it takes care of the login management for you. So it integrates with all your popular identity providers, Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Microsoft, Yahoo. I think I already said GitHub. You can do anonymous authentication. So if you don't want people to need logins, you can do anonymous. So they at least have an account, and that anonymous can allow you to move across. It also can handle usernames and passwords normally. So say if you don't want to use identity providers, you can just use it with usernames and passwords. That's what we did for our Deco project last year. It integrates very well across all of Firebase, and it's very easy to implement. How is it different to Untitled Auth 2.0? I haven't heard of that specifically, but things like Auth 0 and Amazon Cognito, it's very similar. Firebase does handle it a little differently because it has more of allows for social logins, but the idea of it is pretty similar. And it makes sure that you don't have to worry about handling usernames and passwords because that's dangerous, and the last thing you want is people's passwords to be leaked. So let's add Auth to Firechirp. So I've got down here in our components, we have our menu bar, and the menu bar contains a few elements. So it's made up of the title and the login button. We'll see the login button is dependent on whether we're logged in or not, and we'll handle that. I've thrown throughout the application, if you're coming back to this later, a bunch of to-do comments based on where things need to be updated to support Firebase. And so if you feel like as an exercise to the reader later, you totally can do that as well. Before we do that though, we're going to add some things to the Firebase config file essentially. So we're going to create another constant in here. We're going to call it the auth UI config. Now, this is going to basically identify and configure what our Firebase UI is. Now, Firebase UI allows you to take some of the common Firebase elements, particularly auth, and you don't have to worry about programming that yourself. If you feel like you want to program your own UI screen and login screen, that's totally fine. You can do that. I'm just here to do this because it's much quicker and I'm not too worried about how it looks. I'm just going to take and copy and paste this code here, and I'll run through what it's doing. So we've got a few things here. So the sign-in flow, you can determine whether you want the authentication with social providers to pop out of the window in a pop-out window, or you can do it as a redirect and it redirects back. Underneath this, we have Firebase auth providers. So here I'm going to be using Google and the email provider. And I'm also going to set the callback to not have to worry about that. So got the config. One thing I've completely forgotten about is the fact we actually have to set this up in the Firebase console. So we're going to jump back to the console. On the left-hand side, we have the authentication tab. All right. And that's probably because we've got nothing here yet. I hope nothing's broken. We're going to set up the sign-in methods on here. So again, because we're using Google and email, we're going to allow for email. And if you want to do passwordless sign-in, you also can do that here. I'm just going to leave it disabled because it requires. That's a problem. That is a problem. Cool. Can't say I'm surprised that live demos don't work, but let's see if we can go back into here and try it again. Nope. Just authentication. Cool. Yeah, live demos, they really something has to go wrong, right? No, that's all configured correctly. Hmm. Check the console. Ugh, yikes. Hmm. Cool. 404s. Yeah. That's interesting. Configuration for that, hey? Well, while that's happening, I'll do something wild. DB first. I don't think I have to create a DB first. I don't think. But we can try that. Um, so I'm relatively sure you can do the authentication and then you can do the Firestore after, because you don't need Firestore to use authentication. But test mode. Come back to why I've selected that in a bit, and we will select our favorite Sydney location. Uh, Good fun. Waiting for this to load. Okay, I'm just going to check this other version of this app to see if it has the same problem. Yeah. Wonder if it's a problem with GCP for once, which wouldn't be ideal for this talk at all. No, error. Okay. Hmm. Interesting. Hmm. Near term lead technical difficulties. Elevator music. Not having that problem. All right. Cool. It's odd. That's for sure. Because I literally tested this 4 hours ago, so it makes things even more interesting. Yeah, that works. Thanks, Max. That's interesting. That's for sure. Um, I can make this work. I do have a backup, but yeah, that's all right. All right, let's jump over to the completed project and we'll build our way back up from there. I'll come back to that in a moment. So, as I was saying, we've done the config for the UI. We're now going to actually implement that UI in here. So, what we're going to start off by doing is we're going to handle um, we're going to handle the login button first. So we actually want people to be able to log in. So what we're going to do, we're going to jump to the login button and we're going to grab two. I've chopped a handle. Where are we? Handle click, handle click. Yeah, here we go. We're going to replace this little typography object with another React component. Um, yeah, I know, Lyndon. It's typical of my types of talks, isn't it? Shout out to everyone who does live demos and they work consistently. Styled Firebase auth. We're going to reference the UI config that we just created, and I'll have to actually reference that in a moment. And Firebase auth, oops, Firebase dot auth, and we're going to close that up. All right, we're also going to quickly import in Firebase and the UI auth UI config from the Firebase file. Cool. And that, in theory, should compile in a moment. There we go. All right. So that will allow us. Hey, there we go. We've got our little Firebase auth. Now, something tells me that if I go back here and try this one more time. Hey, there we go. All right. Let's get started with auth. That should be this could work now. All right. We'll enable email and we will also enable Google. You're gonna have to give this project a name. So we're gonna call it Fire Chirp, and we'll send project support emails to that email. Please don't spam me. I get enough spam as it is. Also not my main email, so really I don't care. Okay, so that should work. That should all be set up. You can see down here, we've also got some authorized domains. So cause issues if you have a custom domain you're using this on, you have to add it here. And yeah, thanks, Matt. So the code is written in JavaScript, but not in a JS file. So TypeScript is a derivative of JavaScript. So it's very similar. You can essentially almost write JavaScript in TypeScript. It's just a typed version of JavaScript, and anyone probably in UKCS will tell you should use TypeScript over JavaScript if you can, because it's much nicer, in my opinion anyway, and I think other people agree. But yeah, so then these TSX files, these are React, so we're using TSX instead of JSX because we're using TypeScript, but they're sort of, if you haven't used React before, it's sort of like a combination of like HTML but integrated with JavaScript. Check out some React tutorials. We did a React tutorial workshop last year, and that's on our YouTube channel if you want a bit more insight into React. And you can also know people on the Discord as well. So if we jump back to our application, now everything's in theory configured. We should in theory be able to say sign in with Google. We'll wait for this to load. Give it a moment. We'll ask what Google account we want. We'll say me. Cool. And cool. It does absolutely nothing. And that's because we actually haven't implemented any state for it yet. So all we've done at the moment is say, hey, we want to log in, but we actually don't know if we've actually logged in or not. So let's fix that. We're going to actually check if the user is logged in, and we're going to use a handler for that. So we're going to call this, what are we calling this? The unregister auth observer. So this will check if we've logged in and update the state as necessary. So on auth state changed, and the user changed, and set logged in, and we'll check if the user is actually true. Cool. I think I've done something wrong because I can't write code. Yep, I have. Throw this in here. What have I done? There we go. Give it a quick format fix. Better. And of course, let's set logged in is of course implicitly any. Yeah, that's okay for the moment. Because we are also going to have to change this. Return. And we'll unregister. Work for me. We're also going to update this state. I'm just going to copy this code real quick because I can't stop writing it out. Not that code. Nope, that should be good. I'm missing something here. What's going on? Can't find unregister or observer. Cool. Of course, React is having a conniption. All right, so we now know at the very least that we're actually logged in. So we now see that it now says log out, which is awesome. And we're now going to actually quickly handle the fact that we need to be able to log out. So in this handler is just for this logout button. So we're just going to call firebase.auth and sign out. Looking at the comments, is this an async? Yes, to a point. Use effects are inherently asynchronous. That's probably not entirely true, but this is essentially sort of registering to say to Firebase, hey, if the auth state has changed, can you update the state, this logged in state to say true or false? And that's so the page will at least refresh. Hopefully that answers it. What else we got here? Yeah, Matt did type. You should check out his tour de front end talk he did last week. That was pretty cool. A lot of fun, very interesting, and I think he did a fantastic job. So that's cool. So we got all that. So now, what else? What else do we need to do? Well, at the moment, this panel here is meant to represent sort of the logged in user, but at the moment, again, it's just static. So we're going to fix that. We're going to open the file called user panel. All right, and this is going to have a little bit here because this is not handled in state, and it probably should be handled as state. So we're going to fix that. We're going to do this, set user name, and use state, and we'll just be empty for the moment. Actually, that's not what my example says. We actually use, this is probably not ideal, but this is a demo. This is not tried true for what you should be doing, but this should be fine for now. All right, so we got that again. We are also going to bring back the unregister auth observer in this component as well. We'll comment that out for the moment. So now, once we wait for things to fix themselves up, what have I done here? We're going to add that. That's actually not ideal at all. I'll leave that out for the moment. And actually, let's handle this real quick by throwing this all into here. Actually, should handle this up further up. Username is not null, and then otherwise, if it is, then we give nothing. I haven't done imports because I forgot about that as well. Thanks to VS Code for helping me out here. Firebase. Cool. All right. Nope. Error. Set username. Set username. I can't type either. Cool. All right. All right. Cool. So now we have my name, which is pretty cool. And if I decide to log out now, you'll see that the panel now disappears because I've logged out. And if I try logging back in, and we give this a moment to load again, we'll see that I log back in. Now you can, if you want, to grab the user picture. We're going to do that again real quick. Just as a demonstration. User picture here. And we'll see the code here. We've grabbed from the user, we've grabbed the photo URL. And we then can say from the avatar source, we can drag in the user picture. And what have I done here? That shouldn't be an issue. There we go. Oh, you love React. What have I done now? We'll throw it or nothing. That's fine. All right, and we now grab my Google photo, which is just a bunch of blocks, but that's dynamic. And that means that if you were to log in or someone else to log in, that will now show their display name and their picture if they have one. So that is Firebase Auth. I went through it a bit quickly and I probably didn't do a very amazing job of explaining how to implement it. But the general idea is, if I come back to the menu bar, where are we? General idea is that you want to call the Firebase UI, or if you want to do this manually, you can do it. You can do it in something like this as well. Call the Firebase UI, ask it to log in. Firebase will handle that authentication for you. And then anywhere throughout the app, I can call firebase.auth, and the classes and methods after that will be related to authentication, and you can do that anywhere from your application. And I'll show you that more when we get into building the posts with Firestore. Cool. All right. So I want to talk about sensitive data very briefly, only because you might be watching this talk and not had much dev experience, and that's fine. I just want to sort of give you a better understanding, and probably some good habits to get into as you get into more roles and potentially get a job in software in the future. So sensitive data on the internet, which includes passwords, is something that's very complicated and difficult to get right. Um, and you really should take the most utmost care about this. User privacy is a massive thing these days. So unless you're Facebook, you want to try and store as little data as possible about users, because even if you take all your possible precautions, companies still have data breaches, unfortunately. It's becoming more and more common that data breaches just happen and we just sort of accept it. But the less likely that our application is to releasing that data, the better and best in your head. Yes, I will talk about security rules as well with Firestore, because they are important because of how Firestore's thing is different. But yeah, so it's one of the reasons why Firebase Auth, and not even Firebase Auth, but other authentication providers like Auth0 or Amazon Cognito or Azure B2C, etc., they all take the burden off you needing to write your own authentication system with passwords and all that. And if you've seen this video, you will know exactly what we're talking about. This is a video from 2013 by our good friend Tom Scott on the Computer File channel. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But essentially, he runs through all the really bad ways that you can store passwords. Things like you don't store passwords plain text, you don't do weak encryption, you do some interesting salting and that sort of thing. But Tom Scott does a much better job. It is from 2013, but the general principles still apply today. But if ever you're writing a password authentication system, firstly, don't. But if you don't have that choice, at least try and look up the most recent tutorials from a trusted source for the web framework you're using. And quick shout out to Have I Been Pwned? This website has a ton of information that you can not publicly available, but ton of data breaches in it. So you can throw your email in here and you can see, hey, has my email been in a data breach? And data breaches are from all sorts of companies. There was a hack in 2013 by Adobe. There's some other companies in there I won't talk about, but you can see from the screenshot there's over 11 billion pwned accounts, and this screenshot was taken a couple of weeks ago. I'm relatively sure Troy Hunt added more. You'll see that it's also pwned passwords, so you can throw your password in there. Now, this is only passwords that were really weakly secured, so I've thrown the password in there. You can see that password has been seen more than 3.8 billion times in known data breaches. And another screenshot there, that's one of my throwaway emails from when I was like 9 years old. It's been in a lot of data breaches because the internet is the way it is. But it's good to keep in mind, data breaches happen, so make sure that you at least understand what you're writing and make sure you try and make it as secure as possible by also storing limited amount of user data if you can. So, now I've scared everyone enough. Let's talk about Firestore. Firestore is a NoSQL database solution for storing and syncing data. It is highly scalable and flexible for storing data. Just quickly, I thought the check your password page was some sort of cruel joke. No, it's not. It actually is a really interesting page if you want to do some background reading after about how that works. And it is open source on GitHub. Cool to know. Anyway, Firestore. So Firestore is designed to handle real-time data updates and syncing between your server and the client. Unlike more familiar setups with current databases, clients actually normally interact directly with Firestore with queries. Now, you can avoid this if you don't want people interacting directly and just handle it through cloud functions, but that's not really how Firestore is designed to be used. You can complement it, but it's a little different to what you might be familiar with. And you would have definitely, if you've done IMS 1200 by now, or you've done SQL in high school with Microsoft Access, relational databases, they're designed to have a set schema. And they use a relational model to try and avoid duplicate data in the database. They normally use some sort of tables and rows to organize data, so I'll show a demonstration of that in a moment. Firestore, on the other hand, is NoSQL, which is actually also known as a non-relational database. which means there is no schema a data must follow. That means that I can take any set of data and throw it in there, and the database will accept it. Firestore organizes its data in documents and collections, and then these documents and collections can be nested to create a hierarchical data scheme. And the documents are JSON-like. They're not exactly like JSON because there are limits to how much you can store in a document, but they are JSON-like and they're pretty easy to deal with. All right, so I've got an example here. This is what a relational database normally looks like. So this is a library system. We'll see on the left we have 3 members of this library, Amity, Luce, and Ida, and the 3 books that they may have individually gotten out. So they're linked together with the membership ID to the borrower. So we can see that here that Amity has borrowed Goodbutcher 02, Luce has borrowed Goodbutcher 01, and Ida, you probably can't see that, but has borrowed the Snowballs a history. Now, how would this look in Firestore? Well, Firestore, we don't care about duplicate data because that's not how NoSQL works. Now, you can build Firestore like a relational database, but that's annoying. You use up a lot more of your reads doing it, and if you can grab all the data at once, it's much faster. You have to worry about it less. So we can see here that these have been organized. These are the book IDs, and we can see the book. We also store the borrower in here. So if you have, say, duplicate data, so say we are borrowing, Luce has borrowed Goodbutcher 1, 3, and 4, you'll see that every time we store the borrower's full information in there. And that's a general idea of how NoSQL handles stuff. Now, this is not the be all and end all, and you can spend literally hours trying to figure out what's the best schema to use in NoSQL. My advice is try and pick one that makes sense, that encompasses most of your edge cases, because you're going to have a lot of them, and just go with it, because wasting too much time trying to work out a schema, it's probably not worth your time, and your cost savings for an application that is having maybe a few people use a day, if that, with Firestore's limits of 50,000 reads of Firestore a day, are not worth your time. But hope that makes sense. So this is what an interface I've written for what a post will look like. We're only going to use a couple of these just because we don't have a lot of time. So we're just going to demonstrate adding just posts today. But we can see here that this post is stored with a string with the content as a string, author as a string, author ID, if they've liked it, and if what the post time is. You can extend this more, and again, NoSQL doesn't have a schema. You can verify and validate data with security rules, which I'll cover in a bit. But for the most part, you're going to have to design applications to be more defensive and don't trust the data it's given. Unlike sort of the data that you might get from a backend where you can more trust the data because it's only the backend touching it. So let's go through adding Firestore. Now, you would have seen I already did initialize the database. I can go back and demonstrate this again real quick with my other project I created. So if we're going to create a Firestore database, on the Firestore database page, there is another version called a real-time database. I'm not going to talk about that today. That's sort of the older original version that Firebase used to use. There are advantages to each of them, but I think you should be using Cloud Firestore because it's nicer with documents. You can check out the comparison if you want. But we're going to start off and we're going to create a database. Now, you'll see it's going to warn you about security rules again, because clients can talk directly to your application. Security rules are really important. I'm going to put it in test mode for the moment, and that means that technically speaking, anyone watching the stream can screw over my database. Please don't. But you'll see that it automatically adds a security rule that allows you to test it, and it'll automatically disable that security rule after 30 days, as seen here. Cool. And finally, you can set your Firestore location. Now, chose real-time database over Firestore, and I regret it every day, says Max. Yeah, that's fair. They've got some interesting quirks, I can say that. But you can set your location. So if you're curious which GCP data center is Sydney, it's Australia Southeast 1. Southeast 2 is the new Melbourne, but once you click that, you can click enable and it'll create a Firestore. Now, when you get that, you'll have an interface that looks like this. So if we want to create a quick collection, and just as a demonstration, we can call it posts, right? Document IDs will automatically generate, and we'll just say we have some content in here. And that's it. We've now got a collection and a document. Now you can add more. You can add a sub collection to add documents inside this and create a hierarchical tree. We're not going to do that today. We're just going to create a simple layout. You can add more fields, and you can see that there's no structure here. So if I create another document and say, hey, I only want to add the author here, and the author ID will just be 1, 2, 3, sure. That works. And Firebase is not going to stop you from doing that. So again, you need to bear in mind that you can't and can trust the data at the same time. So you do need to build in, when you're building your application, to make sure that you're actually verifying that, hey, is this data I'm actually getting, is this actually what I should be getting? TypeScript's useful because it will try and create types to sort of parse the data for you and see if it's correct. If not, throw it away. But yeah, it's something to keep in mind. There's also a ton more types, just like a regular SQL database. You can have types, so you can reference things. You can have geopoints, nulls, arrays, and again, if I was to say to have an author with say the author string has their name, and I can create another author object with a number, Firebase doesn't care. So your application needs to care and at least accept or deny or just to ignore the data it gets given. So I'm just going to delete this collection. So we'll go back to nothing. And we're going to implement the create posts first. So what we're going to do first is back in the Firebase file, we're actually going to define some references to some collections we're going to create. We're only going to create one reference today. So we're just going to call it the post reference. We're actually going to export that first, posts reference. We're going to call Firebase again. We're going to call it Firestore this time. And we're going to reference the collection that is posts. All right, so this is grabbing the topmost collection that is posts. Firebase app default already exists. Yes, it does. Cool. So now we've done that, we now can actually reference this posts ref in our component. So firstly, we're going to touch the create post component. And I've already got here, we've got a state that already handles what content is in here. So if I type content in here, that will be stored in this value automatically for us. But we're going to start off with this handle click. So this handle click is for this button here. So if I was to push this button, this is what this will run. So let's actually, before I do that really quickly, again, import Firebase. And we're also going to import that post reference. Cool. All right. So we're going to start. We're actually going to grab the author first. So we're going to call this author. We're going to ask Firebase, and we're going to call the authentication layer, and we're going to get the current user there. So current does not exist at all. That's okay. This is fine. React trying to catch up. So we're now going to check if the author actually exists. Now the author might not exist if, say, you're not logged in, because the current user will return undefined or null. In this case, actually, it's just null. So we want to make sure that if someone happens to magically click this button, even though we will hide this create page if it doesn't exist, we want to make sure that people can't break our application. All right. We're going to create a new object. We're going to call it new post. We're actually going to give it a type. I'm going to give it the post interface I defined earlier in the PowerPoint. You see I've defined it in a types file. Cool. Yep, I'm aware. And we're going to go in here and yep, we know that we now want to create content. So content will just be the post content. Cool. We're going to also want the author. Now author.displayName. Now this could technically be null, so we're going to just call it no name if, say, the user for some reason doesn't have a display name, because that is possible. We're also going to get the author's ID, so author.userID. Cool. We're going to add the post time, so this post time is just the current date time. And if people have liked it, we're just going to create an empty array for that. We're not going to touch on that today because we just don't have enough time. That should all be good. That is a valid post. So now what we want to do is actually bring back that post reference and say, hey, I now want to actually add this object to that collection. Cool. And that's done. Now, because we're trying to write an interface here as well, we also want to just set the post content to be clear. That will just clear it for us so we don't have to worry. Cool. That is that. So if I was to write a masterpiece now and say, hello world, it doesn't show up yet, but we can go back to our Firestore, give this a quick refresh, because this takes a moment. We'll see in the post collection, hey, we've got our author who's James, we've got my author ID, and we've got the content hello world. So we've now actually added stuff to the Firestore. So now, thank you, Coxie. Now, that's cool. It's great. We're able to add stuff, but now we actually need to be able to show it. So we're going to jump over to the timeline component. This timeline component is pretty simple. It is this entire component. The timeline renders the create post and the sample posts. So what we're going to do first is we're actually going to create a new state for the posts and set posts. And we're going to just take this entire long thing because, oops, use state, let's type, and we will give us a moment to load, maybe use state. And I haven't imported Firebase. So we'll import Firebase, we'll import that post reference again, grab it from the Firebase file. I would have added these imports by default, but React will complain if you're not using them, so I didn't. So we're now going to create a use effect. Now, a use effect, for those who are unaware, will essentially run once, or if a dependency in a secondary array is updated. Now, in this case, we're just going to run it once because we only want it to run when the page is loaded. So we're going to create a listener here. Now, this is where syncing with Firestore comes in handy, because you can now take that. You can now take that Firestore data and check if it's updated. And if it's updated, we then add that to the page automatically. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, once again, first import use effect. And we're going to reference posts_ref again. And we're going to say, hey, on snapshot, maybe. Yep, cool. We're going to grab the data. And we're going to ask it every time that it's updated to update it with all the data it's now received. Cool. Did I mean set posts? Yes, I did. Cool. So we now actually have the data on the page. Neat. Now, that's cool. But now we're actually going to get rid of the sample posts data altogether. So we're wanting to map over set posts, because set posts is an array. So we can maybe do that. Nope, not set posts, posts. All right, we're also going to have to do some fancy magic here because of the fact that the state at the moment is just this document data. We're going to have to actually say, hey, sorry again, I have blanked. We want to say, hey, this post is actually something else. Kenton says, is there a nice hook for this, or do you need to use event listeners? There is a Firebase React hook. There's a few out there. The ones I looked at for this talk actually all seem to be a few years out of date. So Firebase moves pretty quickly. Firebase is currently has stables version 8 of the SDK, and version 9 is coming out soon. So Not that I can see. You probably can create some nice hooks if you'd like to. I'm ignoring that today because this is a demonstration. I would use hooks normally to handle this for me, but again, that's more focusing on React, and we're not too worried. Talk's not about React. Talk is about Firebase. So what we're going to do, we're going to say, okay, this post actually is going to be a post, and we're going to import that as well. So what have I done here? Let's reference my post.data, of course. So whenever you call a post, you need to actually get the data, and you already can see, hey, that's the content we just put in there. We've now just said, hello world, awesome. Now, let's actually make this a little nicer, because at the moment, if I was to chuck something else in here, go watch the Owl House, sure, and post that, you'll see that one, we actually get F errors, and secondly, you'll notice that these aren't sorted. In the Twitter world, we actually sort posts that you can set your view to be most recent posts first. So we're going to do that here, and also we're going to handle that error. So let's first sort this. Now this is going to get a bit messy because of my bad code, but we're going to sort A and B. We're going to get the data for that, and we're going to get the post time of it, and we're going to say, hey, the data. I'm going to get the post time of that one. It's probably a much nicer way to do it, but it's okay. What have I done here? Don't know how that got there. Give that a moment, see if it's going to like it. Does like it. You'll see that now it's rearranged itself. That's cool, but actually that should be good. One last thing we're going to quickly do is we're actually going to handle the errors. So this is lazy, but I'm going to do it like this anyway. When we want to display a component, we're just going to throw it in a try catch. This is not a nice way to do it, but it does do the job. And we're just going to return nothing if it fails. You probably should actually tell the user that something's wrong, or at least try to display a minimized version of it. But you know, this does the job. There's better ways to do this. But now, if I was to throw in here, this is Firestore, you'll see, hey, it posts and it works. And then we can come back to the Firestore visualizer and see, hey, there's 3 posts in here, and these will work. Sweet. Now, just quickly, I'm just going to prior to talking about the last things, there is one last thing I need to remove this, and that would be because I wanted to try and deploy this at the end, and Firebase React will complain that I have unused imports. Okay, that was a lot, but the general idea of you need to create post references, and those post references can modify your code. Not modify your code, sorry, modify your Firestore instance. So let's touch on security rules because these are important. Firestore, because a Firestore is able to be read and writable by clients, this directly causes some pretty bad security problems, particularly if your code might not be as defensive as it should be. If someone puts a weird Unicode symbol that your code doesn't handle for some reason into their Firestore, it's going to break, even if your application didn't input it there. So currently we've set Firestore to be in test mode, so everyone can read and write it, including people who actually aren't signed in, which is, not ideal. We're going to put some quick security rules in, and also I'm going to show you a quick way. Actually, I don't have a demo for it, but you can also validate data with it. The Firestore documentation has got some interesting docs on validation. Security rules do have limits on how much it can process at once because Firestore is meant to be really, really quick, but you can validate the most crucial things if you want to. One thing I've put right down the bottom here is you should never release to production without these in place, because if you do, and someone comes by and say, hey, I wonder if I can drop this database, they will literally be able to do that, no problem. So probably good if you actually add some Firestore security rules. So in the console, we can jump over to the rules tab, Now, I've already created some rules here because we are quickly running out of time, so we're not going to dive too deep into these. I would highly recommend checking out Firebase's YouTube channel for the full series on how Firestore works. It's long, but it's got some really good docs and great presenter on security rules and how to structure your data, and it's much more information than I can talk about in an hour. So would recommend checking it out. So we're going to get rid of this. Uh, and we're going to first ask to match over posts, and we're going to just call this the post ID. Now from there, you can say to that post ID, hey, I want to check this post ID is valid, or hey, can I check in another table this post ID has been verified by a cloud function that does spam checking or whatever. You can do a lot of stuff with it. So we're going to firstly allow everyone to read it, right? What have I done here? What's my code say? No, that should be good, I think. Interesting. I have a feeling this is just the UI freaking out, but I might be wrong. Allow, not allows. Okay, so we're going to allow everybody to be able to read this. So that means that if you're storing sensitive data, user IDs are not technically sensitive in this context, so we don't need to worry. So if you are storing sensitive data, you normally don't set it to read. A quick side note with security rules is that anything that isn't defined in here is automatically not readable or not writable, depending on what it is. So at the moment, if I was to actually try and write to this, I'd be denied because I'm only allowed to read. And that's just a default security measure because people forget. If you add stuff to your Firestore and you happen to forget to add a security rule, the last thing you want is, again, someone wiping all that specific data. So what do the match statements mean? Okay, good question. So we're talking about the Firestore service here. Another quick side note is security rules also apply to object storage, but I'll get back to that. We're going to match over the databases that's a specific database. So this database here, this is just referencing our Firestore database and the documents. All right. So we're going to match across the posts collection, and then any object in there, and we're going to reference that as post ID. I think, does that make sense, Yash? Let me know if I didn't do a great job of explaining that. But if I just really quickly duplicate this and show you that in our Firestore that we have the collection of posts, and then these are just the post IDs, and we've just referenced that as a variable so we can use that again. But hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so the next thing we want to be able people to do is we're making Twitter here. Well, actually, we're making a ripoff of Twitter, and Twitter is infamous for not letting people edit things. So we're going to take it a step further and not let people delete things. So we're just going to allow people to create things if their request. So request is a variable here that we can use to say, hey, this is the request, and we've got .data in here. Actually, no, it's not, just .auth. Say, hey, this is a request. This is the person who authored it. We're going to make sure that the request returns not null. And that means that, yep, anyone can create something if they're actually authenticated. So if someone's not logged in, they can't do that. Finally, I didn't touch on this simply because it gets a bit deeper into Firebase and it's a bit messy. But if I want to say I only want people to modify specific things, I can say specifically for the likes, I can say, hey, if the, oh God, this is a long thing, request.resource.data.diff.resource.data. You can see this gets logged. The affected keys is has only been changed, that it's only liked. Then we allow people to change it. And also if we make sure that if the request is not null. Yeah, this is an interesting Firebase feature that is semi-new and much more documented than it used to be. But you can technically enforce only certain fields to be updatable on any level. This is done because we're checking out the requester's resource data and saying, hey, if this is different to the actual resources data, has only the liked field been changed? And also make sure that the request is authorized. We can also say here, hey, is the resource, if you want to say only an author can change it, we say, hey, resource.data and say author ID. And that makes sure that the author can only access it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But that is a cool thing you can do with security rules. I'm going to publish these. So that means that this is a bit more secure now. Give us a moment to publish. There is a really neat rules playground that you can use to go through, and you can test these rules out on specific edge cases that you might have. You can also run authentication and all sorts of things like that. Reading a comment ticks a couple of maxes. You can do something cool where you can only people to write new data or prevent updates to that data. Yep, and that is pretty much what I've done here. So people can create a data, but yes, that's it. Lee says, I'm doing Deco 3801. We're building a React app and we're looking to do it in React.js with Laravel framework. Also looking to use Firebase for the database. Any thoughts on it? Go for it. I think it's perfect for those smaller projects like Hackathon, your personal projects, and things like Deco. I said earlier in the talk that we used just Firebase Auth for the for our Deco project last year, and it worked great. So you definitely would recommend it. It's less of a worry, particularly for Deco. You only have 13 weeks really to build something. So the last thing you want to be thinking about is, hey, how do I deal with a Postgres database and make sure that the backend service handles that? And I'll talk about a couple last things with Firestore that would be very useful for Deco right at the end. So yeah, cool. That is pretty much security rules. Again, this quite literally scratches the surface of what's possible with security rules. Also, it's not very comprehensive. There are definitely problems with this, but you can read the full docs and the videos on Firebase's YouTube channel. Cool. All right. So we've built Firechirp essentially. How are we going to host it? Well, of course, Firebase is a solution for that as well. It's called Firebase Hosting, and it works pretty well. And I'm going to show you how to do this in exactly 4 commands. And one of those being is npm build. So really only 3 commands. But Firebase will handle all the behind the scenes work for you. Firebase gives you a subdomain that hosts it on for you. And there are options adding custom domains as well. It's obviously because it's provided by Google, CDN is great. It works everywhere. It's pretty instant. So let's do that. I'm going to quickly just fix up one thing in here I forgot to fix, and that is just to hide this. Actually, no, it's fine. We'll leave it as is. We're going to make sure that, yep, nothing's problematic. So we're going to, hey, all right, we've broken everything. I've somehow gotten into bin. All right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to need to log into Firebase. So this is the Firebase CLI for those who probably never seen it before. It's very powerful and it's very cool. Of course, giving my poor computer a moment to catch up because streaming is quite intensive. So we're going to start off, we're going to log into Firebase. So let's do that real quick. It's going to ask us, I'm going to say no. That's for CLI usage and analytics. I'm good. We're going to log into the CLI with my Google account, allow access, and cool, we're signed in. That's command 1. We then want to actually initialize Firebase in this repository. Now, you only have to do this once, and then you can store most of these files in your GitHub repo. Check the full Firebase docs for what you can and can't store, but pretty much it's Firebase RC, I think you can store in the Firebase.json. Don't quote me. We're now going to initialize the project. And this is what's really cool about Firebase is, one, the CLI looks pretty cool, in my opinion. But secondly, there's much more to do locally, like emulation. So there's a massive emulator library that you can use that pretty much emulates all parts of Firebase. So you don't even have to worry about pushing it to production before you do this. Firebase in all caps, yes, I agree. You can see here, hopefully that's not visible because it's on the wrong side of the screen. Um, so we can see here that, I'm going to throw it over here. Okay. We can see here there's a ton of stuff. So we got things like real-time database emulator, Firestore emulator, and security rules. You can configure cloud functions to be deployed here as well. Hosting with GitHub Actions. Yes, you can set up a CI/CD workflow and automatically deploy it once you push to your GitHub repo. It's great. Storage, more emulator stuff. Remote config, I'm not getting into. But we're just going to go with hosting today. So we're going to select hosting and go with it. Now, you can technically start up a Firebase project right here if you really want to. We're going to use an existing one that already exists. We'll grab the list. Now, Firebase project is called this. Now, we're setting up the hosting setup. Now, Firebase React will automatically actually output to the build directory. So let's do that. We're going to configure this as a single page app, useful for things like React routing and all those routing type libraries, even if you're not using React. We're not going to set up automatically deploys with GitHub today because this is not the repo for it, but this will automatically log into your GitHub as well, add the secrets for you, and it will fly, and it's great, but not today. All right, that's command 2. So it has already added a HTML doc. We can actually quickly show that if I open Explorer. Yeah, I'm using Windows. That's not what I wanted. We can see in the build directory, it's added a very simple index.html file. Cool. You can also check out the documentation. That's fine. Don't really care about that. So next thing we're going to do, we're going to build. And hopefully that I haven't left a unused import in. So we can give this a moment. And once we do this, we can then run Firebase deploy. So yeah, we're going to give this a quick moment. React takes a sweet time to compile. Of course, my poor computer is struggling. We also can quickly check out the Firebase console for hosting as well. All these pages got really nice graphics as well. And the great part is if you open up any of these, you can check out the docs straight away, including a video from Firebase's YouTube channel. So Firebase's docs are pretty damn awesome. And the reason why I've been referencing it so much today is because you're going to probably need them. So we can check out the docs real quick while we're waiting for this. If we go to, say, the build section, so Firebase is split up into 3 main sections: build, release, engage. Engage being more analytics type stuff and experiments. Release and monitor being cryptalytics, performance metrics, and build being the main parts. And we can see, hey, if we want to jump to the Firestore docs, yep, there's a lot here. You can see, that's probably a bit small, but you can see on the side that we've got a bunch of things like securing data and validation and all that type of stuff, but we'll leave that to the experts. Cool, that's finished that. So we're now going to run to Firebase deploy as our final command, and this will upload the files directly to Firebase hosting, and the application will be live with all its bugs in all its glory. So give that a moment. And again, because it uses GitHub Action, you can use GitHub Actions. You can automate this, so you don't have to worry about running Firebase deploy every time. And you can also use Firebase deploy to also deploy other parts of your application. So if you want to use cloud functions, you can compile that into the same thing, but we will not do that. So in theory, if we go to this address, we can go log in and sign in with Google. I realize I didn't remove this, but that's okay. Give this a moment. Maybe, no. There we go. And we can do the same thing again. Cool. And that is that is a live application. So if people want to go and mess around with the application and break it, by all means, go right ahead. I'm not going to paste this in YouTube chat because I know it's going to be broken. There we go. Kenton's already on there. And yeah, that's Firebase in more than an hour, but uh, yeah. So what can you do from here with Firebase? Again, as I said, we're just scratching the surface of what Firebase is really able to do. Uh, I said I was going to talk about Firebase storage. Firebase storage is very, very similar to how Firestore works. So it uses the same document model with security rules. So pretty similar, being able to upload images real quick. Cloud Functions can help bridge the gap for not having a proper backend. So they're serverless, which basically means you don't have to run a server. They just run, and when they're hit with, say, if you want to run something when someone uploads a post, maybe doing spam filtering, or you want to resize images, or something like that, you can do that with Cloud Functions, and there's tons of different triggers for that. You can have push notifications with cloud messaging. That's pretty self-explanatory. You can use if you're building a messaging app, you can use in-app messaging. But most importantly, explore the platform. There is so much there. As I said, yeah, I already got you, Kenton. Sorry. Uh, can you run Doom on it? I don't know. Maybe. Kenton's point of Cloud Functions also let you do more advanced security logic if the rules don't cut it exactly. So if you want to say store some tokens for whatever reason of users for other social media platforms, I totally haven't done this, and you don't want users to be able to read those, you can use Cloud Functions to actually be a better authentication level and manage that. Does it run Crisis? Look, it's headless, so probably not. But if I jump back to Firebase's platform again, you can see on the sidebar there's a ton of stuff. So if you want to do A/B testing live on your application, you can do that. There's a new extension center, so common things that you want to do with your application, say like resizing images automatically or triggering emails. People have already written these for you, so Firebase is a really great way to get up and running. So yep, so I've spoken about it, but check out the Firebase docs, firebase.com/docs, and also all throughout the Firebase console. And the Firebase YouTube channel. There is a ton of videos on here for for pretty much every platform that Firebase offers. So, and they're sometimes funny, and there's also change logs and all sorts of stuff in here. So check it out if you're more interested. But that's Firebase in about an hour and 13 minutes, I guess. I'm here to answer questions about Firebase, hackathon, project ideas, because hackathon is coming up. Software dev, cartoons, anything else within reason. Are there any competitors to from other cloud platforms? Not to the level that Firebase supports. Amazon does, I forgot what Amazon calls it, but Amazon has sort of like a integrated auth and static app. Azure has Azure Static Web Apps, which does static web app deployment and Azure function deployment, and has some authentication things in there. I actually used I tried static web apps for another project of mine. It works reasonably well. But in terms of Firebase specifically, there's nothing quite like it yet. I'm sure that Amazon and Microsoft are scrambling to try and beat Firebase. Firebase has been out for many years. Yes, in terms of authentication, AWS Cognito, Azure AD B2C, Auth0. Yeah. Did I use Create React App? Yes. In spite of Matt's talk last week, I still did use Create React App. Sorry, Matt. But it's a small project. I'm not deploying this to work. And yeah, I normally do, and you probably should too, use Create React App for your hackathon projects or personal projects that you're not too worried about ballooning up to the scale and necessary things with bigger projects. Matt disapproves. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah. I think that's about it. I'm probably going to end the stream semi here. Lyndon saying, using it for Deco 3801. You know what? unless Matt has a good reason, I don't see a reason not to use it for Deco 3801. Again, you're not like Create React App is good to get started, but like the main point of the talk is more of a if you're creating it on a business level and people like you already have strict requirements and things necessary for your app to run, you're probably better to build that from scratch than have to worry about Create React App. Um, this or Blazor. Well, I mean, Blazor's not even. Blazor is, for those who are unaware, Blazor is Microsoft's answer to React. It uses WASM and C Sharp, and it's pretty neat. Would I use Firebase or Blazor? Probably Firebase because Firebase is not the same thing. But for React or Blazor, it highly depends on your infrastructure, really. But React is more mature. Um, yeah, so especially, yeah, cool. Matt answering that question there. For those watching later, Matt says that especially a project that doesn't necessarily need to be maintained past November, like Deco 3801, I 100% agree with Matt here because Deco, Deco, you're only building a project at the end of the semester. Unless you're building a cool game or something that you want up forever, then sure, why not? We'd love to see it. Um, I'm going to be hanging around on the Discord for a bit after this, maybe play some Scribble.io or something if people are interested. So come hang out on Discord, discord.uqcs.org if you're not already part of it. But thanks for coming to my talk. It definitely went over an hour, which I sort of suspected, but hopefully it gives you a good reason to use Firebase for your personal projects and smaller projects. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Again, I'm Jimmy D on Discord and on Slack, I guess. Um, and yeah, cool. All right. Well, I'll catch you guys later. Peace.